All right, everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Kyle Anslone Show. I have a lot to talk about today, a lot happening in the Trump administration, interesting statements being made, and then, of course, war expanding in the Middle East. Ansar Allah, the Houthis have a big strike that hits the Ben Gurion airport in Tel Aviv, and Israel is already responding as well as continuing their genocide in Gaza. So, a lot to break down today's show. It will be a solo episode today, but if you are listening, you're going to want to subscribe to the show because I got big interviews coming up over the next 2 weeks. Our old friend Misty Winston, she's returning to the Misty Winston show, and she's going to be on Wednesday. And then next week, returning to the show will be Kelly Vallejos and Dan McAdams. And so you won't want to miss those. We will have plenty to talk about as we do today. And that's because Trump just keeps giving us content, and most of it is horrifying what he's saying, but it's really important that we get into it and break it all down. So let's play this first clip from Trump on Meet the Press.
Let's talk about foreign policy, sir. Okay. You just signed a minerals deal with Ukraine. It's a sign, it seems, that the United States is invested in Ukraine's future. The Secretary of State told me this is a very critical week. Are you any closer to reaching a peace agreement between Ukraine and Russia?
I hope so.
How would you characterize
I do believe we're closer with one party and maybe not as close with the other, but we'll have to see. I'd like to not say which one we're closer to, but we did do a deal for the American people that was good. We were able to get rare earth. You know, the Europeans are getting paid back. They have a loan. We didn't. Biden just gave him $350 billion. He has no idea where the money is, what happened. And at least we'll, in one form or another, get our, I don't feel so foolish. And remember this is Biden's war. This was a war that was never going to happen if I were president. This is a horrible, horrible war. And I get to see shots of soldiers through, satellite that are just so terrible. 5,000 soldiers are being, 5,000 soldiers a week on average are dying. They're not American soldiers. But I want to solve the problem. They're Russian soldiers and they're Ukrainian soldiers. And if I can save 5,000 souls, I just love doing it.
So I found this statement just so interesting on a number of levels. One, I think it's in some ways good that Trump is talking about and bringing it down to the lives being lost on the battlefield. As much as people want to say, oh, that Trump is just replaying Putin's propaganda, if he's saying, I want the Ukrainian soldiers to stop dying, that at least is something that can't be considered Russian propaganda. And so, I think that's an important point, at least publicly, to make. I think Trump is doing a decent job of not publicly placing blame on one side or the other at this point. Hopefully he understands trying to critique and criticize each side is problematic. My concern is there when he's saying that we're a lot closer with one side than the other. Previously, I would have thought that he was talking about the Kremlin. Obviously, the kind of proposals that we've seen from the Trump administration, like Ukraine kind of de facto recognizing the Russian control of the territory. They currently control the Crimean Peninsula, most of the Luhansk, part of the Donetsk and Kherson and Zaporizhia, just recognizing that as Russian and kind of trying to move on from there. And the Ukrainians being very opposed to that, but the Russians seeming somewhat willing to go along that route. At the same time, he's talking and emphasizing a lot about the minerals deal. He's talking about it's a natural resources agreement, which sounds, I think it's going to be a lot of scamming the United States to me. So what the U.S. is doing is we're going to open up joint ventures in Ukraine that's going to, build our mines and things to get rare earths, to get natural gas. And when these new companies are opened, American businesses or American businessmen are going to, I guess, get first preference to invest. And maybe even the American government will get portions of ownership over these companies. And then whatever value the Ukrainian government assigns to these companies, they're going to be able to use that money to buy American weapons. And this sounds really problematic. And this is how I broke it down in my coverage of Trump's remarks here at the Libertarian Institute. This article, Trump says U.S. may walk away from Ukraine-Russia talks. And, this is what the text of the agreement says, the minerals deal. If the United States delivers new military assistance to the government Ukraine in any form, including donation of weapon systems, ammunition, technology, or training, the capital contribution of U.S. partner will be deemed to increase by the assessed value of such military assistance. And he's talking about, again, these joint ventures where the U.S. is going to get more ownership of these companies, but who knows what their actual value or worth is? What if they're opened up in areas of Ukraine that are one day taken by Russia? Then, we have this ownership in a company that doesn't own anything in Ukraine, actually. And so I think this is going to be a big scheme that's going to accomplish two things. One, ripping off the U.S. And number two, it's going to bait Donald Trump in continuing the proxy war. And I'm very concerned here when he makes these remarks, and he's talking about being closer to one side than the other. He's actually talking about being closer to Kiev at this point. Now, I want to go on and play the second clip from Trump's remarks here.
How long do you give both countries before you're going to walk away?
Well, there'll be a time when I will say, okay, keep going, keep being stupid.
When does that come? Are you close to it?
Sometimes I get close to it and then positive things happen. Okay. So I hope it gets done.
So if you watch this interview between Welker and Trump, it's often confrontational. And it's interesting where she follows up and where she presses to get more answers from Donald Trump. And what she's really concerned about here is, when are you going to walk away, Donald? You can even see her licking her lips as she asks Donald Trump this question. And this question, I think, reveals so much about what the foreign policy establishment wants Trump to do here. They want him to walk away from negotiations because they think that means that we're going to continue to support and arm Ukraine, continue this proxy war. And there's some evidence we are going down this road. Just today, there's going to be a brand new article that I wrote up at the Libertarian Institute within a couple hours of this show wrapping up, detailing how the U.S. is sending Patriot missile systems to Ukraine that are after we upgrade them and take them from Israel. So we're giving Israel our current operational Patriot missile systems that are the more advanced kind. And then Israel is giving their less advanced systems to Ukraine, being facilitated and paid for by the United States, of course. And so this seems like Donald Trump is really starting to walk down this road of continuing this proxy war. And maybe it was Zelensky that nudged him in that direction. I wrote this for the Libertarian Institute last week about Trump and Zelensky's meeting in the Vatican. I explained that two sources familiar with the 15-minute conversation on Saturday, as cited by Axios, Zelensky told Trump that he would have put more pressure on Putin to get a deal, and the U.S. president responded positively to that position. After the meeting, and there's reason to believe this, including after the meeting on Truth Social, Trump went and condemned Russia for carrying out missile attacks on Ukrainian cities and threatened new banking and secondary sanctions on Russia. Additionally, it was reported by Telegraph that Trump is the one that wanted to meet with Zelensky in the Vatican. And additionally, the Axios article goes on to say that they believe this meeting went well because J.D. Vance and Steve Witkoff weren't present at the meeting with the president. And so I think it's really important to understand how malleable Trump's thinking is on Ukraine if it's simply not having J.D. Vance and Steve Witkoff there to kind of support him in his instinctual position to want to get the United States out of this war. I think we're headed down a really rough path here. Now, before we move on from the Russia talks issue, I think it is important to hear from the Ukrainian side. And so this is Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov.
The peace process continues. President Putin's main goal is to achieve the aims he declared when starting the special military operation. We should secure our national interests. Is it preferable to achieve these goals peacefully? Yes. And initially, the president tried to achieve these goals peacefully. Now, the president remains open to political and diplomatic methods of resolving this conflict. But the situation is as it is. We hear no reaction from Kiev. The process continues. Let me remind you that President Putin said during his news conference in the Kremlin that he supported this initiative to establish a ceasefire. But before it is established, several questions should be answered and several issues settled. They were all listed by President Putin.
So I just thought it was important to play this clip to kind of show that the Russian position here isn't changing, that the Russians are just kind of very soberly going along with saying the same thing, that sure, if we could get the deal we want at the negotiating table, we're happy to come to the table with Ukraine. We're not willing to accept a ceasefire and basically allow the Ukrainians to rearm, to reposition, to build up their defenses for 30 days. That's not going to happen. We're going to continue this war, and if the Ukrainian side escalates, of course, we're going to escalate in response. And if we don't get a deal that we want, we're going to achieve our ends on the battlefield. And I really hope that the Americans understand this, because this is the Russian position and they're not walking away from it. Now we got to move on over to the Middle East, where I mean, there's so much going on, and I feel like there's just multiple shows that I could have done in a single day breaking down everything that's going on in the Middle East. But I think there's a few more important events to really talk about that we have to focus on. And one, of course, is the confrontation between Israel and now Yemen after Ansar Allah, the Houthis, the group that has controlled Yemen for the past decade in the capital city in Sana'a, despite an American-backed Saudi war to oust them, and then a year-long bombing campaign by the Biden administration, and now 1,000 airstrikes over the course of a month and a half from the United States. And this group only appears to be getting stronger as they were able to conduct a hypersonic missile attack that hit the main Israeli airport, causing damage. Now, it didn't seem like very much damage, didn't hit a critical part of the airport. A whole bunch of civilians weren't killed or anything like that. However, this was able to evade Israeli and American missile defense systems. And so I think the Israelis are gearing up for a major escalation on all fronts. In Yemen, in Gaza, they bombed the hell out of Syria over the past weekend, including near the presidential palace in Syria. But let's hear what Netanyahu had to say. This is just today.
As far as the trade routes, obviously we're being challenged. The whole world is being challenged by the Houthis, including in the dastardly attack they did today near Ben Gurion Airport. We will not tolerate it. We will take very strong action against them. And we always remember that they act with their patron Iran's direction and support. We will do what we need to do to take care of our security, to respond effectively, and to give Iran a due warning that this cannot continue.
So a few things, but first I'm going to ask everybody to hit the share button wherever you're watching the show, whether that's on X or at YouTube. If you are watching on YouTube, be sure you subscribe to the show. Again, we got big guests coming up and you're not going to want to miss those interviews. And so I think a couple important things here that we're hearing from Netanyahu. The first is that he's saying that we're going to bomb Yemen. And look, if the Yemeni people want to stand up for the Palestinians, then that's, their choice. But I really do feel bad for the people of Yemen because of the decisions made by the Ansar Allah leadership here. I think there's about to be hell rained down upon them from the Israelis and from the Americans. I think where Joe Biden might have looked to steer Netanyahu in a more restrained manner, I think Donald Trump is going to be motivated to allow Israel to unleash hell on the people of Yemen, and the U.S. is going to go along with it. Now, of course, that's all facilitated by the U.S. and could be stopped if Donald Trump wanted to, but that's not what he wants. And so I think we're going to see a major U.S. and Israeli bombing campaign here in Yemen. But as Netanyahu goes, he, as much as he quickly kind of talks about Yemen, it's all about Iran. And it does seem like he really wants to build up U.S. tensions with Iran and saying that everything the Yemen does, everything Ansar Allah does, is really all facilitated by the Iranians. And this is apparently a viewpoint shared by our Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth. Let's get this post on X that he had over the weekend. Message to Iran. We We see your lethal support to the Houthis. We know exactly what you are doing. We know very well what the U.S. military, you know very well what the U.S. military is capable of, and you were warned. You will pay the consequences at the time and place of our choosing. And so that certainly seems like he is making a threat to attack the Iranians. And one of the crazy thing is that isn't even the worst thing that Pete Hegseth tweeted in the past few days. Let's put up the second tweet from Hegseth. He has a arrow here saying that sovereignty is more important than journalism on the track and in 2025 America. And what he is talking about here is basically saying that, you know, the Trump administration is going to crack down on the First Amendment for their nationalist, what they see as nationalist goals, which a lot of times are just the same things as Israeli first goals. And if it's not dangerous enough about this warning and moving and threatening towards war with Iran, one of the few things that makes me think Israel and the United States may actually not go to war with Iran is that Israel is very busy in Gaza, in Syria, in Lebanon, in the West Bank, by primarily in Gaza. Israel is really now gearing up to get more and more entrenched there. And so this is from Netanyahu spokesman David Mencer just today announcing a ramped up of Israeli military operations in Gaza.
And this expanded operation will help the return of our hostages. The plan will include, among other things, the expanding and the holding of territories, not occupation, the expanding and holding of territories and moving the Gazan population south for its own defense and denying Hamas the ability to capture humanitarian supplies. And also there will be powerful attacks against Hamas. These actions, we believe, will help achieve victory. And the Prime Minister and the government believe that this is a worthy plan because it can both achieve both of our goals in this war, which are the defeat of Hamas and the return of our hostages. The government has also made it clear that this plan certainly differs from predecessors in that we are moving away from the method of raids going in and going out, but to expanding the territory held by our military and remaining in them to prevent Hamas from taking it back.
So this is, I think, just about as close to an announcement of official Israeli annexation of Gaza as we're going to get. What they're talking about, and I explained that this in an article I wrote for the Libertarian Institute earlier this week, that Israel is preparing for a major ramp up of military operations in Gaza. And this was initially reported by Haaretz that Tel Aviv was going to call up tens of thousands, and they have now issued those notice to Israeli reservists to return to active duty. And what's going to happen is that these reservists are going to be sent to Syria, to Lebanon, the West Bank, in a smaller number to Gaza. But what this is going to do is free up other Israeli soldiers that are, I think, more their active duty and heavier combat roles to now go into Gaza. And then once they're there, they're going to kick all the Palestinians that are currently in Al-Mawasi. This is what formerly a humanitarian safe zone. Israel has actually eliminated all the safe zones on the map, but this was formerly the area declared a humanitarian safe zone by Israel, where there's hundreds of thousands, maybe even close to 1 million now, Palestinians living in a tent city. And they want to force and displace all these people. They're likely going to take their tents, which are now their homes, all their stockpiles of food, if they've, managed to keep any, mattresses, any level of comfort, all their extra clothes, and they're going to be forced. The men are probably going to be rounded up and sent to any number of Israeli torture prisons and camps, where they're going to be abused for months and months before maybe they're released without ever a trial or a charge. This is what they're talking about, doing a mass ethnic cleansing campaign of the Palestinians in Gaza, and then official military occupation until the Palestinians are gone, at which time that this will just become another part of Israel to be settled by Israeli settlers. Now, there's maybe one hiccup in this plan, and this is back to my article that I had from the Institute, and it's unclear how many of these Israeli reservists will actually return to active duty. In March, Haaretz reported, which, by the way, Haaretz is an Israeli outlet, outlet speaking with Israeli military officers who were informed by reservists they would not return if called up. Now, this isn't because of the horrors that they are forced to commit in Gaza if they are called up, because they're going to be a part of a genocide and to kill, but because of Netanyahu becoming increasingly unlike a prime minister and more like an Israeli king. This was the attempted dismissal of Rosen Bar, the head of the Shin Bet, one of the Israeli intelligence agencies. I believe that is still being blocked by the Israeli court, but that is an issue for a lot of the reservists, as well as Netanyahu's attempted judicial reforms, which is all about protecting him from the corruption that he certainly seems guilty of. And so it's not about the moral and ethical dilemmas here. However, it still could have an impact on the battlefield if the reservists don't come back. And Haaretz says that some of the reservists, some of them have even signed letters saying that they won't come back, are members of the Israeli military that fill key positions and roles, that they're commanders and officers. It's not just as though they're going to be short a few privates, a few soldiers who would serve on the front lines, that these could be officers, people that they really would need to carry out these intense military operations, again, not only in Gaza, but around the rest of the Middle East. So before we wrap today, we have to talk about just how out of control Tel Aviv is at this point. And we have Medea Benjamin here, who was on she's from Code Pink. She was on Judging Freedom with Andrew Napolitano earlier today, and she's explaining one of the most unbelievable things that Israel has ever done: an attack on a Freedom Flotilla, a private ship attempting to bring aid into Gaza.
This boat, the Conscience, was supposed to have left from Malta. It was anchored in international waters. There were 12 crew members and 6 passengers on board, and there were dozens more passengers, including my partner, Tig Barry, who were scheduled to get on that ship. They had smaller boats to take them out there, but the night before is when they were attacked. And they were attacked by drones. It seems very, very plausible that the C-130 plane that was Israeli, that has been shown to have been in the area, flying low, hovering over there, dropped the drones, which damaged the ship. And now there are negotiations ongoing with the Maltese government to bring the ship into the port, to have it fixed, and to allow it to sail.
So this is just such a brazen attack on civilians just attempting to bring aid to starving children. I mean, we can now see the pictures, just go on ads. They're absolutely horrific. It's so hard to look at, but you probably should see what your government's supporting. Little kids, probably 2 or 3 years old, you could see their arm bones, their bellies swell, their faces swell. It's absolutely horrible to look at. And this is happening, and there's one group of people that are attempting to help them, and the Israelis actually carry out an attack on this private ship. I mean, just imagine if any other country were to do something like this. If the Russians were to carry out a drone attack on a ship, a civilian ship, an independent ship, bringing in food into the people of Ukraine, into the port of Odessa. If Hamas had attacked the ship, or as the Yemen Houthis do when they attack ships going to Israel. But again, these are all just regular cargo ships. We're not even talking about a civilian ship to a besieged and starving population. And to carry out this attack and to expect no repercussions, that's one of the things. Somebody said to me, I can't believe Israel would do this. And I'm honestly not surprised, because why would Netanyahu expect any repercussions? Why would he expect anything bad to happen from this? And at the same time, if he sets a precedent here that international aid organizations could just break the siege and just sail a ship right on into Gaza, well, then that's really going to interrupt his genocide campaign, which depends on the Palestinians even starving to death, or being unwilling to let their children starve to death, and agreeing to leave to go to some refugee city in some third country, probably some place in Africa where they have no connection to, no other community or anything like that. They're just going to be shipped off and stuck somewhere where they're going to linger for a few years, and it's probably going to be, long-term impoverished existence for most Palestinians wherever they're sent to live. And this is, will interrupt their ethnic cleansing campaign if the Freedom Flotilla and other humanitarian aid ships get through. And that's why they don't want this to happen. It's why it's important that the international community pays attention to this story, that we talk about it, that Israel is doing this, because if the Freedom Flotilla gets through, that could break the blockade, which would be extremely important. But that's also why you didn't see mass coverage of this on the Sunday morning news shows. In fact, I was watching the Useful Idiots program with Katie Halper and Aaron Mate this morning, two really excellent analysts, and they said that they didn't witness any coverage of this issue on the Sunday morning news shows. And again, you just couldn't imagine it if it was any other country that attacked a humanitarian aid ship attempting to bring food to starving children. However, in a sense, we really shouldn't be surprised, because Israel is the one country that not only could get away with the mass starvation of children, but could actually get the United States to come to their defense to do so. I wrote this article last week for the Libertarian Institute. U.S. tells World Court Israel has a right to starve Gaza. And what's happening here at the UN's top court, they're hearing arguments based on a UN General Assembly vote that said that we have to discuss what rights the Palestinians have, what obligations the Israelis have to the Palestinians who are under their military occupation, right? It's one thing to say that one population would have to support and provide welfare to another, but the Israelis actively have a blockade around the Palestinians and are denying them food, water, fuel, and everything else needed to have a normal life and to sustain life. And so if you're going to impose a blockade on a group of people, you have to feed the children, or else you're clearly in violation of international law. And the U.S. is saying that no, Israel has no obligation to do so whatsoever. And the Trump administration, they've made their policy very clear. Everything that happens in Gaza is the fault of Hamas. Everything gets blamed on Hamas. So no matter how many children Israel starves, no matter how many bombs Israel drops on tent cities, killing entire families at a time, at this point, the U.S. is always going to blame Hamas. And this is exactly what Netanyahu wants. I think Netanyahu's primary focus is and has been expanding Israel's borders to what he sees as greater Israel, southern Lebanon, southern Syria, the West Bank, and Gaza. And here he's going to check off one of those big areas and add the Gaza Strip. And not only just add the Gaza Strip as an annex the territory, but do so without the population that lives there, which is very important. If Israel wants to be a democracy, it can't have half the population as Palestinians, because then you can't enforce your democracy apartheid on the Palestinians. You have to have a supermajority of Israelis, and that means expelling the Palestinians from the West Bank, and Trump is signing off on it. All right, everybody, with that, I will wrap up the show there. Again, if you are listening, be sure you're subscribed to the YouTube channel. You're going to want to catch the interviews I have coming up. Misty Winston on Wednesday. Next week, Kelly Vlahos and Daniel McAdams return to the show. Great conversations. We'll be breaking down really important stuff. So head on over to the YouTube channel, subscribe. And of course, if you have any ideas for future guests, people you want to interview, questions or topics you want me to tackle, that's a great place to leave a comment and let us know. Thanks, everyone. We'll be back with another episode on Wednesday at 4:45 Eastern.